Hello, and welcome to Book Circle Presents An Ever-Mounted Cavalry. I'm Earl Wyenberg. We are following the experiences of Brother Eugene when he, along with several other soldiers in his cavalry, were transformed into centaurs by a strange, unknown enemy. They are now on their way back home through a tunnel through a mountain, and Brother Eugene is helping cope with one young fellow who is going mad over his transformation. He glanced back. Manny was looking at his commanders, clearly wondering if he dared get up off his brother. Toph was staring with his mouth hanging open. "Right," said Hugh. He strode past Eugene, knelt before Toph, and took his right hand in both of his. Manny jumped as from an electrical shock, sat up on Toph's back, and saluted, gripping his brother's waist with his knees with a presence of mind Eugene admired. Hugh greeted Manny, but mostly spoke in low, earnest tones to Toph, who listened gravely. "He's doing a good job," Fitzsimmons remarked to Brother Eugene. "We've seen 5 other cases of hysteria on this little morale tour we're making. He always seems to know what to say. I'm only surprised the number was so low." There was a note in the general's voice that made Eugene study his face. It was tight-lipped and pale, the face, Eugene thought, of a man who has promised himself a nervous breakdown as soon as he has the time. "You think he would make a good king?" Eugene asked, partly to turn the subject. "I think we need a king, prestissimo," Fitzsimmons answered, "and speed's the main issue. Did you follow all the wrangling it took to get Oliver voted heir-elect? Now all that's to do over. With no king at the helm, one of our militaries crippled, and a new enemy with unknown powers and motives at large in outer reality." He'd been staring through the walls of the tunnel. He now met Eugene's eyes. "Sorry, brother, I shouldn't burden you with this." "It's nothing many of us haven't been worrying about already, sir," he answered. This just made the general sigh. "How's your hip, sir?" he asked. "Aches like a bad romance, but I can use it." He nodded back toward the offended joint and added, "We rummaged up some horse liniment and put it on under the dwarf's cold pack. It may be helping." "I have some morphine too, sir," Eugene said, wondering how he would calculate dosage on the enlarged officer. "Thank you, no. Don't want to get drowsy. Keep it for cases like this lad here, though His Highness seems to have done his trick again." Hugh was now standing before Toph, who had risen to stand at attention, still listening gravely. The prince shook the soldier's hand, saluted Manny and Peter, and turned back to Fitzsimmons. "What did you tell him, sir?" Fitzsimmons asked. "That I thought no less of him for the change, so he wasn't to think less of himself. That no soldier lost honor for being wounded in battle, that he would get any help we could give, and so on. Don't worry, I was suitably vague about what the help was." The prince's tone shifted from tired to bitter at the end of this speech. Prince and general continued their walk down the line of march. At a beckoning gesture from Fitzsimmons, Brother Eugene fell in with them. His mind churned on the prince's last remark. The most urgent help a transformee needs is to be turned back. But Hugh had to be vague about it. "Sir, has the Red Lady said anything about the transformations?" he asked the prince. The Red Lady was the expert on shape-shifting. "Yes," Hugh drawled sourly. It was something, Eugene reflected, when sourness was a lift in the mood. It was better than tired or bitter, or Fitzsimmons' bottled-up strain, or Toph's raving despair. "She's explained why it's tricky, and she can't give a definite answer yet. Apparently, it's much harder to undo transformations if you didn't do it yourself. There's another reason, too," Fitzsimmons added gloomily. "It seems we've been transformed particularly hard. I didn't understand it. She used a religious term, which puzzled me." Brother Eugene felt a chill around his heart, and a second cold struck deep into his horse torso. In fact, he realized he was feeling chill around both hearts. "Transubstantiation?" he asked. "That was it? Do you know what she was talking about?" Brother Eugene saw that Hugh was following their conversation as intently as was Fitzsimmons. "A little. I'm told that a Fey or other shapeshifter always has a true form, a default or habitual shape that they can take easily, that they tend to revert to. Apparently the same is true even of creatures that don't shapeshift like us. Whatever little magic we have about us, it holds a memory of our true shape." Without realizing it, he slowed down. The pale light of the tunnel seemed freezing. The teacher in him went on explaining mechanically, but he heard himself as if he stood on the other side of a wall of ice. "So if you were turned to stone, but your true shape remained, you could be restored. But if the change was a transubstantiation, you'd be truly stone, truly dead. Transubstantiation means a change of being. If we are transubstantiated..." He couldn't push through any more ice. Fitzsimmons took over. "Not only can the Red Lady not find the way back to our old forms, there are no old forms for her to find." Eugene realized the prince was standing before him. Therefore, he'd stopped walking. "Gentlemen, I am so sorry." It occurred to Eugene to reply that he had only lost a shape, not a father and a brother, but he decided saying this would make no one feel better. He just nodded. "Better than losing legs," Fitzsimmons grumbled. Brother Eugene became aware of a young soldier fidgeting and dithering nearby, making noises and repeatedly clearing his throat. Forgetting that he ought to let the prince speak first, Eugene turned to the boy and said, "Yes, lad?" "Sir? Sirs? Your Highness? General?" "Speak to the medic," Fitzsimmons ordered. "My pal, there's blood coming out from under his jacket. I think he's been trying to cut himself in two. He's hidden the knife. He won't say anything to us. Can you..." Brother Eugene broke out of his freeze and followed the soldier back to a problem he could bandage. His commanders followed. Eugene stitched and bandaged. Hugh told the mad centaur he needed him whole and promised undefined help. Fitzsimmons detailed 2 other centaurs who were taking it better to stay with the patient, watch him, and be an example. The mad centaur never said anything, only hung his head. They moved on down the line of march. Eugene now saw why Fitzsimmons wanted him to accompany the morale tour. It was a long series of short hops. At most of them, Eugene stayed in the background and said little or nothing. But he realized that performing the autopsy had gained him a certain celebrity. Often, after their brief audience with the prince, centaurs would ask Brother Eugene about their new bodies. Did they now have 2 hearts? What had happened to their brains? Did they have 4 lungs? What could they eat? How much should they eat? When could they eat again? The chain of command followed the prince and the general. Colonels and captains and majors showed up with questions and reports at a regular rate. Some miracle of scuttlebutt seemed to have spread the word that Prince Hugh, General Fitzsimmons, and a medic were going about fixing psychiatric problems. Anxious friends arrived regularly, beseeching. In spare moments, Eugene wondered how it happened. Was it magic? Did this sort of thing happen in unsundered armies? Brother Eugene did little that was really psychiatric. Mostly he patched and stitched and salved. He and the general occasionally wrestled and thumped the hysterical. The prince soothed, exhorted, commended, sympathized, and sometimes received sympathy, and did a fair job assisting with dressings. Fitzsimmons barked commands to protect and restore discipline, and ordered that the other medics be set to work. "We need to get moving again," Fitzsimmons said after he and Eugene had finished with a new-minted centaur who had discovered bucking. "Yes, sir," agreed Eugene, "but first they need to be fed." "Fed? You think that's the problem?" Fitzsimmons asked incredulously. "No, sir. The problem is they've been given more chance to reflect. Getting on the march would indeed help. but they have not had enough to eat. We have not, as you know in your own belly, just as I do, and we can't eat straight oats. A few 100 gallons of hot mash is no cure, but it would give them energy for marching and make them feel cared for. It also gives strength for more hysterics, Fitzsimmons retorted, but no good ever came of keeping soldiers from food. Once again, Prince Hugh had been listening. I will send to the lords and ladies, he said, to get provisions from the dwarves. If they can spin us a magic tunnel through the mountain and off the plain, they can surely spare us some oatmeal. Fitzsimmons smiled sideways. The gilt card's still in play. We'll get our money's worth out of my bruised haunch. Brother Eugene looked around. They were now near the end of the line of march. Here were the pack horses and their minders. Some centaurs had stoically taken on pack duty. Here also were the travois bearing the dead, including the King and Prince Oliver with their honor guard, including Laurent. Behind lay empty tunnel. Further on, the crystalline torches were out, and there was only darkness and conjecture. Did the tunnel stop or not? If it stopped, what was there? Never mind. Time to keep marching. The tunnel led to somewhere off the earthly plain, and the white errant had joked about sailing. Sir, Brother Eugene asked Fitzsimmons, where does the tunnel come out? What is it like? The spy. Where did the tunnel come out? Ivy asked. Brother Eugene sighed. Ivy felt the horse ribs pump at her back. It was very strange. Not in the world. The tunnel came out on a long stone quay, on water, of course, but on a hillside. All around were mountains, but they were made of water. Or you could say it was a sea of huge waves, but standing as still as hills. Under a sky of gray clouds that might have been stone. They didn't move. The dwarves knew no more than we. There were ships at the quay, 2 big sailing ships on the slanting water. They loaded us in, packed very tight, and blew us away on a summoned gale. It was almost like the flits through the air. But it didn't last long. Then we were in fog, but where was that? Ivy broke out. The borders of chaos, the edge of creation, nowhere on a map. The Kurdians talk of hyperspace. Our chaplain wondered about Tehom, the deep that rolled before the world was made. There are all manner of worlds scattered round, Ivy, big ones, little ones, and there's the in-between. This was in between. It can look like anything, emptiness, knotted up pieces of sky, pieces of world. Most of it no one can venture through, not even fays, let alone mortals. Anyway, the fog cleared and we were on the Aegean. That's a patch of sea in its own little world. There's an island there called Brickell that Grand Normandy owns. Well, owns part of it. Fays own most of it. There's a passage in their woods that leads to Earth, England, Berkshire, a little town called Upham. We have a cavalry base there, so we got off the ships and just walked home. He sighed again. Ivy's head was buzzing with questions, but first she needed to say, I'm sorry, about you getting changed since you don't like it. Oh, well, it's not so bad, not for me. It's been very interesting, an adventure when I thought I was too old to have any more. I've always liked horses, cavalrymen after all, and now I can understand them so much better. And I'm as fast and strong as one. There are definite pluses. I don't want it, I wouldn't have chosen it, but I can imagine people might. No, it's fellows like David who were hoping to have a whole normal human life before them that I feel really sorry for. Me too, then. And about your friend Laurent getting killed, and your king and all the others. Thank you, Ivy. They were silent for a bit while Ivy collected her thoughts. I am in an ordinary village in Oxfordshire, she thought, sitting in ordinary woods on an ordinary morning. But the nice old man I'm boarding with turns out to be a fairy tale creature, and my landlady turns out to be an enchantress or something, trying to turn him back into a regular old man. But that was only the beginning. You're not English. That's right, I'm Grand Norman. Is Miss Blackholt too, and Lieutenant Fletcher? To be sure. But don't worry, Ivy. At least don't worry about that. We aren't enemy agents. We are allies England doesn't know it has. Why don't you tell them? We can't. We're sundered. That means— Wait, Ivy commanded. She fished a notebook out of her coat pocket. She brought it on her morning walks with Brother Eugene with the intention of taking bird-watching notes in it. Sometimes she actually did. Now she had another use for it, keeping track of her questions. Hastily she wrote sundries, G. Norm where, next king, Kurdians, Channel French, Ben Thing Wolf. Right, she said when she finished. You can't tell because of sundries? Because we're sundered. The sundering is the luck that hides magic, he said in the tone of someone reciting an old proverb. That means if you try to make a magic public, you have worse and worse luck until you stop. Contrariwise, if you try to hide magic, you have good luck at that. But it didn't work, I found out. Well, you're not the public, you're just one person. Small numbers don't count. And small numbers of people don't get believed. So when rumors leak out from behind the sundering, they're just taken as folklore and fairy tale and myths. About things like centaurs. Yes, he sighed. But just as myths. And when you and I walk around town while I'm wearing my glamour scarf, looking like a complete old man on a complete old horse, I'm quite confident that the glamour isn't going to get broken, not in front of everybody. And he turned his head to look at her, and for the first time he spoke sternly to her. If you tried to tell people about us, about Miss Blackholt and me, you would, of course, not be believed. But you could still cause a lot of trouble for us and for yourself. How? She asked cautiously. You would get in trouble because people would decide you were crazy, or a liar, or a crazy liar. We could get in trouble if they decided we were the ones who drove you crazy, or some other deviltry. Well, I won't, I promise. You're right, it would be a bad idea. Please don't be mad at me. He smiled, and she could feel him relax behind her. I'm not mad at you at all. I'm just warning you. His face became serious, though not stern. I must also warn you that now you are sundered. Your luck has changed. What does that mean? She asked uneasily. It means that now that you've managed to have one magical thing happen to you, you've broken the barrier, crossed the sundering, and now there's no twist of luck to keep more magic away from you. And you did manage it, didn't you? Worked at it. Well, yes. Was I wrong? Call it an innocent mistake, natural curiosity. But it puts you in danger. What? They heard rapid footsteps along the path. Ivy jumped up. Brother Eugene did not bother to stir. Lieutenant Fletcher came around a clump of bushes and stopped dead, staring. Ah! He exclaimed a moment later. Not this, too! Ivy knew lieutenants outranked sergeants. Brother Eugene should not get in trouble because of her. It's not his fault. They come not single spies, but in battalions, he exclaimed at apparent random. What? No, I expect not. What happened? She saw last night's session, Brother Eugene said. She was watching from the top of the stairs. There was silence for a few seconds while Fletcher reckoned what had been visible from the stairs. He turned red. You had a very educational evening, then, he growled. I didn't know you were going to do that. Fletcher breathed loudly through his nose a couple of times, then said, Of course not. Well, why weren't you asleep? You were supposed to be asleep. You looked asleep. I suppose it's because I haven't been drinking that tea with the sleeping potion in it. And why was that? I took a sip the first night, but I didn't like it. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, so I've just been pouring it out the window." Fletcher snorted a dry little laugh and sat down cross-legged on the path. He put his head in his hands. Ivy sat down with him so that she, he, and the front end of Brother Eugene made a little triangle. "What was in the tea?" Brother Eugene asked. "Do you know?" "There was no potion," Fletcher answered, "or rather the tea was the potion. She just put the enchantment on some chamomile tea." "That explains it," Eugene remarked. "Beastly stuff." "Lots of people like it," Fletcher muttered, still head down, "but not enough. Oh dear, you have put your foot in it, Ivy." This reminded Ivy of where she and the monk had left off. "Brother Eugene was telling me I was in danger." Fletcher, head still down, nodded. "What kind of danger?" He answered, "Did you ever read a myth or a fairy tale that didn't have a monster in it, or an evil fairy, or a witch, or something of the kind? Now the sundering won't steer you away from them anymore." "There are such things?" "They're not nearly as unlikely as centaurs." He lifted his head, saw her notebook, and pointed at it. "What's that?" She handed it to him. He studied it briefly. "Curious, determined, and organized. A mere force of destiny like the sundering didn't have a chance." He took her pencil from her, corrected the spelling of Kurdians, wrote out Benandanti, then handed it back. "Tell me what happened, please. What happened this morning, I mean, and what Brother Eugene has been telling you." She complied. She ended with, "He won't get in trouble for telling me, will he?" Fletcher waved his hands in the air. "No, no one's getting in trouble. Well, we all are, but that's just the situation, not official censure. Brother Eugene has done the right thing." "Ignorance kills," Eugene murmured. "Right. Anyway, I'm not in Brother Eugene's chain of command. He's cavalry, I'm vanguard. And Miss Blackholt is majory, come to that. Separate branches of our military, like armies and navies. We're just all on the same assignment." He sighed. It occurred to Ivy that she was making the grown-ups sigh a lot. Not good. With orders to be secret. Oh, well. "How old are you, Ivy?" I just turned 14. "Oh, good. That simplifies things a bit. You're willing to keep our secrets with us?" "Yes. Why does it make things simpler my being 14? Personally, she'd not found it simpler at all, so far. "You're a legal adult." He flashed a grin at her expression. "In Grand Norman law. We're very medieval in some ways. Back then, well, remember that in Romeo and Juliet, Juliet was only 14, but old enough to get married." He watched her blush. "Ha! I'm revenged for last night. We don't actually let that happen. But you're old enough to take an oath of secrecy. That will help." "Help?" Then the penny dropped. "Oh! Once I was asking Miss Blackholt about Brother Eugene's, condition, and she started stuttering. Had she run up against an oath of secrecy? Is it magic?" "Probably, and yes." He rose. "Come along, please. We need to tell Miss Blackholt what's happened." Brother Eugene heaved up, and the three of them started down the path. As she trotted, Ivy cleared her throat and said, "Could I ask?" "Of course. Your list. Sure, you can ask. Just keep walking." "Where is Grand Normandy?" "I know it's not the same as Normandy in France, but that's all I know. Is it a fairyland or like one?" "It's scattered all over England and France and some other places too, in little pieces. Neighborhoods and little towns and individual families. They're sundered, so they're the places you stare at on the map but never visit, or just pass through when nothing odd is going on." "That village in Berkshire, Upham? Yes, that's one." "I have a question," said Brother Eugene. "What comes not single spies but in battalions? Shakespeare, isn't it?" "Yes, Hamlet. Claudius says, 'Sorrows come not single spies.' It came to mind because we've got a spy on us." And we'll find out more about their sorrows and the spies next time.